Vice Chancellor Hilary Beckles, Vice Chancellor for the University of West Indies. Kishan, Resident Representative for the United Nations Development Program. Fantastic guests, colleagues, SALISES family, good morning, Happy New Year, and a warm welcome to you from Kingston, Jamaica. On behalf of the SALISES Mona family in particular, and our valued partners, the United Nations Development Program, I'd like to thank you for joining us today as we remember Sir Arthur Lewis. Today's lecture sits inside two important moments that we're marking together. First, it's part of UA's observance of Sir Arthur Lewis's birthday, celebrated each year on January 23rd, and an occasion that invites us to revisit the ideas of a Caribbean intellectual giant whose work continues to shape even how we think about development today. And as you'll see from the presentation, even conversations about Gen AI are still conversations that Sir Arthur Lewis's work still represents. It also marks the 50th year since the UNDP partnership agreement was signed here in Jamaica on January 26, 1976, if memory serves me correctly. And beyond that, and Kishan, selfishly so, UNDP has always been an organization that I've always had strong connections with by virtue of the fact that I did work there for 6 years, the very same UNDP office. So, when we reached out to you and we recognized that, UNDP is shifting gears and moving into looking at issues such as digital resilience and how Gen AI can, facilitate development, we recognize that that partnership was necessary. And this presentation today, the UNDP-Jamaica partnership at 50, looking at transformative legacies and future development, is very fitting because not only does it represent a conversation about UNDP's substantive contribution to not just Jamaica, but also the Caribbean, but also the relevance of UNDP and the relevance of the University of the West Indies by virtue of the things that we're focusing on, the observation and the recognition that development and development assistance today represents an important component of societies understand how to move forward. For example, right now, and Kishan, I'm not going to be talking or giving out your presentation. Gen AI for development is being seen as a development tool, and we at SALISES recognize its importance, and we see it more so than former successive technologies for development tool as a tool that can actually facilitate development. I mean, technology for development is nothing new for SALISES. I mean, Sir Arthur Lewis's institute has been something that been involved with technology for development conversation since Norman Gervin's work in the 1980s. And similarly, my work that has actually followed on Norman Gervin's work on technology for development. So it's a natural synergy, SALISES and the UNDP working together, looking at the continuity, the continuous conversation of Gen AI for development. And I'm particularly interested in the conversation today, Kishan, because I know you as an academic. I know many persons know you, and I'm not going to be the person introducing you, but I know not many know you as an academic, but I do know you as an academic. And I know even though you are the resident representative of UNDP, you're still an academic at heart. So I'm very interested in hearing how you, from your particular lens, from the experiences that you've had, and coming from that kind of theoretical, physical, philosophical understanding of the academic implications and impact and the national systems of innovations that work together in the context of development. I'm personally looking forward to hearing this lecture today. Not to put you on the spot, but I'm sure I'll be very happy. So thank you everyone for participating in the beginnings of, I think, a wonderful partnership, and also a signal to be sent globally that the University of the West Indies, SALISES, is focused on emerging and emergent issues that are transformative and are germane to the future of the Caribbean. So thank you everyone for coming. Oh, well, I'm the chair apparently, so I'm going to have to introduce. I think we have a video from our SALISES director, uh, Sir Don Marshall, Prof. Marshall. Richard, you want to run the video?
Welcome to the William Arthur Lewis Memorial Lecture to be delivered today by the UNDP's Dr. Kishan Khoday, and this is in recognition of the United Nations Development Program partnership with Jamaica, more accurately with the University of the West Indies, and we are marking 50 years. 50 years of collaboration. The topic today focuses on the transformative legacy of Sir Arthur Lewis and the future of development. It should be exciting. I expect it to be exciting, particularly because we live in a moment of flux and uncertainty. And while we've been saying that for quite some time associated with the climate crisis and crises associated with austerity and the pandemic, etc., January 3rd marked the ending of the world order as we know it and a return to something looking like 19th century gunboat diplomacy. By that I mean that there's a sense in which the United States has signaled to to its fellow core powers or great powers that one sphere of influence matters, and geostrategically and geopolitically, that is the way in which Trump's United States is going to respond to the challenges it faces and the ways in which it will determine its own national interests. We've had a glimpse of their intentions by documents that were published in November and by pronouncements on the part of the sitting United States president. Although that may seem for those uninitiated to be matters in the realm of international relations and international affairs, you don't frame development policy or development strategies outside of a permissive world development context. So it is going to be difficult to engage in the things that we've been engaging with the UNDP. And as a reminder, the UNDP has been focusing on 4 key thematics: prosperity for all, effective governance, crisis resilience, and a healthy planet. This has merged well with the ongoing research agenda of the fellows in the Arthur Lewis Institute, where we've been trying to grapple with issues to do with structural transformation through industrialization, digital public infrastructure, the need for that, technology cooperation. We are talking about sustainable futures, looking at just energy transitions, food security, food sovereignty. We talk when it comes to climate change, we speak about emphasizing equity and climate action and resistance to unilateral and green protectionist measures. And while we have also focused on social sectors with the UNDP, looking at health, skills, employment, and women's empowerment, all of these issues need to be folded within an understanding of how do we participate in the remaking of the New World Order, what new norms should obtain, and what coalitions of the willing are we in the region willing to join with partners, UN partners, and other international partners in order to map out the principles that should shape the world order going forward. That is our task, that is our commitment. We remain steadfast from the Caribbean that as societies alive with memory and aspiration, we still hold fast to key principles like self-determination, respect for sovereignty, and indeed, in the name and in the footsteps of those who've gone before us, we remain resistant to all forms of colonization. So, as we work with the UNDP in the next 50 years, we wish to see our goals towards decolonization and a full flowering of the human spirit thrive. And I hope that you can enjoy what it is that Dr. Kishan Khoday will share with us today. Thank you very much. Have a good lecture.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Don. And I'd like to officially welcome PVC Aldry Henry Lee former director of SALISES. Thanks for joining us, Audrey. Fantastic. I'd like to now introduce our Vice Chancellor, Sir Hilary Beckles. Sir Beckles. Sir Beckles really needs no introduction. Sir Beckles.
Very much, Chairman. It's an honor to be a part of this symposium this morning and to extend a hearty greeting to Kishan for his role here and representing this historic partnership between the UNDP and the UWI as we celebrate Sir Arthur, who departed our company some 35 years ago, and this 50-year partnership between the two institutions. This is a wonderful conjuncture, and my comments would be of largely a personal nature, but also to historicize some of the relationships that are in front of us at the moment. Especially so, given that I know that there's a younger generation of scholars within our social sciences faculty who might not be aware of the journey of Sir Arthur Lewis through this region, not only as a scholar, but as a development thinker. And I count myself honored to have been a good friend of his towards the end of his time, when he was conducting research from his base at the Cayfield campus. But of course, I had been a student of his as an undergraduate in economic history in British academia. And at the time, and we're talking about the 70s, he was having a tremendous impact upon development theory. Those of us who identified with the interests of the formerly colonized world, and at the time we appreciated his heroic struggle in economic theory to create a narrative around the possibility that colonies could be developed and that former plantation systems can be transformed and societies industrialize as a result of effective policies. Now, at the time, he was struggling against a very, very strong headwind because the colonized world was condemned as if for eternity by standard macroeconomic theory and development theory. They could not see a way forward. And Arthur Lewis dedicated his early years to the pursuit of a path through which transformation and economic development could be attained. And since 3/4 of the world had been colonized, he became a scholar of tremendous global interest in Africa, in Asia, Latin America, all of those parts of the world that were seeking to throw off that colonial yoke look to him largely for a theoretical perspectives to shape policy. I recall as a student also, there was a fair attempt to humiliate Sir Arthur Lewis for his ideas, and in many quarters he was not considered a serious scholar, largely again because of the endemic racism and the white supremacy thinking that had underpinned Western scholarship for centuries. But reconnecting with him, when I joined the UWI Academy in the late 70s, arriving here at Mona, and by then Sir Arthur had moved on from being the Vice Chancellor, our first Vice Chancellor. He had given us a few years in protecting this institution, which exhausted him because he assumed the Vice Chancellorship in the aftermath of the breakup of the Federation, and organized political thinking at the time was, well, if there's no federation, how can there be a federation university? How can you have a regional university if there's no region? He dedicated his entire vice chancellorship persuading the powers to be, primarily Sir Alexander Bustamante of Jamaica, Eric Williams especially, Trinidad, Tobago, persuading them not to dissolve, not to break up the University of the West Indies. And he traveled week after week up and down this region in the quest to persuade not to fragment the UWI into separate little universities. And that struggle exhausted him and really adversely affected his health. But critically, and this is really for my junior colleagues in terms of when I arrived here at Mona in '79, in the Faculty of Social Sciences, Sir Arthur Lewis' name and reputation was shattered. He was effectively dismissed by most of the economists in our faculty on the grounds that he was a liberal bourgeois scholar and that he was a neo-colonial, and that he was not a revolutionary or radical in any sense. And he found himself in a very difficult situation where a generation of young economists who he had assumed would have understood his vision, in fact, he was widely condemned. And I recall back then, it was a formidable coalition of hostility to Arthur Lewis's work. Some of the language was far from complimentary. He was considered a black bourgeois. He was considered an Afro-Saxon, and his place in the academy was severely under attack, and he himself was retreating. But he was always very philosophical, and he would say, from a certain vantage point, that one day they will understand. And that was always his response. One day they will understand, and that has come to pass. The realization that, like Eric Williams, who was one of his very, very best friends and unrepentant ally, would always say, one day we will understand. Well, we've come to this moment where we have seen the developing world emerging out of the old plantation systems. We've seen in Asia tremendous revolutionary economic development using market economics, but within a clear historical paradigm. We've seen, to some extent, the emergence of African economies, and with a vision at the moment, which is to be redefined, but which is emerging with tremendous energy. But all of this is suggesting, as one scholar said, it's the revenge of the colonials to see the United States being bent out of shape in its reaction to China. And this is really what this is all about. Losing that hegemonic position, the end of the petrodollar, a global system redefined along multilateralism, and all of this is the world that Arthur Lewis had been imagining, and people who supported him had been calling for his celebration. So I look forward to hearing this presentation. I'm always very, very, very keen to hear any iteration that focuses on the work and the vision of Arthur Lewis. And I will end by making this other observation. For those of us who have participated and conversations not only around economic transformation in developing countries, but also around the issue of reparatory justice that underpins a tremendous amount of the theoretical research. And for those of us who contribute to this conversation, Arthur Lewis is recognized to be the conceptual founding member of the reparatory justice discourse, simply because in his very famous 1939 little pamphlet, Labor in the West Indies, a little document that has been largely ignored and misunderstood, primarily among economists. And in there, he asks the question, can the West Indies be developed away from its plantation base? He said, yes. He said, how can it be done? Well, it could only be done, he said, if there is an injection of capital that will enable investments to have an impact on the old agricultural systems and industrialization of agricultural commodities. But he said this capital would require highly organized and a focused direction. He said the first source of that capital should be Britain. This was the key. He said the first source of that capital should be Britain. He said Britain had 200 years of free labor from some 10 million people. Now, 200 years of free labor from 10 million people, he said, can be computed. And he offered a method to compute this. And he said, we have to call this Britain's Black Debt. That was his expression. The 200 years of unfree labor from 10 million people must be defined as Britain's Black Debt. It's a debt, he said, that is owed, and it's a debt that has to be pursued. He went on to say he doesn't believe that Britain will want to admit it, but they should be held to account. And therein lies the foundation principle of the contemporary discourse around reparatory justice. Arthur Lewis is like a gift that keeps giving. The more you go back into his work, the more you study his analysis, the more you see its present agenda so very much in front of all of us. So, colleagues, with those words, I wish to assure you that I will listen very, very closely to the conversations with a very, very special interest. And I wish to thank all of you for being a part of it. And I wish to thank Professor Waller and his team for this invitation to say a few words. Thank you very much and have a wonderful session.
Thank you very much, Vice Chancellor. And, if anyone has ever doubted the value of history, ever, the Vice Chancellor just articulated its value with just 1 minute of sentence. There's something that the Vice Chancellor said that resonated with so many people to the point where I got text messages and WhatsApp messages, Vice Chancellor, over one sentence that you said. And when I see you, I'll tell you what it is. This is not the moment for it, but it just goes to show the value of history in looking at contemporary emergent and emerging issues, because one would have never made that kind of connection unless the Vice Chancellor just gave us a quick history lesson into the man that is Sir Arthur Lewis. I'm now going to invite Dr. Stephen Johnson, one of our research fellows at SALISES, to introduce our keynote speaker today, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you, Professor Waller. Vice Chancellor, Professor Hilary Beckles, Vice Chancellor of the UE. PVC, Professor Henry Lee, Pro Vice Chancellor, Graduate Studies and Research. Professor Dan Marshall, Director of SALISES UE. Professor Lloyd Waller, Director of SALISES UE Mona. Dr. Kishan Khoday, Resident Representative of UNDP Multicultural Office. Other distinguished guests, colleagues, welcome. It is with pleasure that I am being asked to introduce our guest speaker. Kishan Khoday is resident representative at the United Nations Development Program, multi-country office in Jamaica, from where he represents UNDP in the Bahamas, Belize, Bermuda, Cayman Islands, Jamaica, and Turks and Caicos Islands. Kishan has been with the United Nations for 25 years, with past assignments in China, India, Indonesia, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, advancing efforts to combat poverty and exclusion, enhancing systems of governance and access to justice, scaling up action on climate change and loss of ecosystems, and building resilience to crises and disasters. He has coordinated over $1 billion in grant assistance towards these goals, leading emergence of flagship UN initiatives for transformational change and local impact. Kishan is a scientist and lawyer by background and is a thought leader on various pillars of the development agenda, including the planetary crisis and climate change, constitutional and governance reform, and decolonial and reparatory pathways in the global south. He has published widely on these topics in renowned academic journals and as a lead author in the UNDP's global and regional development projects. Dr. Kishan Khoday, welcome. Over to you.
Thank you, Prof. Johnson. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor, pleasure to be with you here today. Vice Chancellor, Sir Hilary Beckles, Pro Vice Chancellor, Prof. Henry Lee, Prof. Waller, Prof. Marshall, Prof. Northover, and everyone that's with us today. Thank you so much. It's a privilege to be providing the keynote for this year's Sir Arthur Lewis Memorial Lecture through our strong partnership with the University of West Indies. I found the opening very inspirational. Vice Chancellor, issues of accountability and justice are at the top of the list if we look at the state of the world today and the state of the development agenda, ongoing challenges to achieving those goals of justice and accountability. But also the wise words you shared in terms of the role of labor in development, not just historically, but how does it affect the social and market dimensions in global development, theory and practice. Today, with the world in flux, no doubt these issues remain very relevant. In many ways, much of the flux and movements in many countries around the world, West and in the global South, have a significant element of that nexus between labor and the social market dimensions of development. Now, with that said, as mentioned, it is our 50th anniversary of UNDP's multi-country office here in Jamaica, and it's really been an honor to be with you here today to mark that with our strong partners at the University of West Indies. The University of West Indies has been one of our stalwart, strongest partners over that 50 years here in Jamaica, but of course, more broadly, globally, and of course, across the region. And so a big word of thanks to our partnership with UE over those years, all the thought leadership that we together advanced and continue to do so today and into the future. With that said, I'm going to now shift to my keynote speech, which I'm going to do along with some slides. And so I'll do a screen share, if you permit me a brief moment. Hopefully nothing more. And that should be now there. So just a very quick check to make sure that you're all seeing that to the hosts.
Yeah, we're seeing it.
Yes. Very good, very good. Just double checking. Very good. So to start with, indeed, the vision and legacy of Sir Arthur Lewis, but also the legacies over the years from our cooperation. Now, today marks indeed January 26th, 1976, which is when we launched our host country agreement with Jamaica, and over the years expanding that into this multi-country office where we cover a number of countries here in the Western Caribbean. Today is also special because by proclamation of the Governor General, 26 January 2026 is now identified as National UNDP Day in Jamaica. So happy National UNDP Day to everyone. And this is in recognition to our partnership, not just the UNDP, of course. It's really those legacy achievements of our local partners, communities across the country over the years, and UNDP standing in solidarity with those communities. The continued importance of the partnership going forward. Now, just a very brief snap at the last 50 years. Of course, UNDP Job 1, center of our mandate, poverty eradication, reducing extreme poverty, generating income, basic inputs in terms of water, food, agriculture, livelihoods from the onset when we commenced this journey of our local office here in Jamaica in the 70s onwards. And over the years, taking on more of a multidimensional lens and approach. So multidimensional view to poverty in terms of the policies and initiatives, and leading to more systemic changes to overcome those barriers to equality, addressing those things that continue to hold back equality and justice. Second, on environment, basic access to natural resources for livelihoods and combating that extreme poverty when we commenced in the 70s and onwards, and that of course continues as a major challenge and focus, but then also taking this more multidimensional approach, of course, over the years, the last few decades in particular, looking more at climate resilient livelihoods, how nature is not just a extractive resource for that exercise, but a foundation for development more generally in terms of the resilience of ecosystems. And of course, we've seen the last couple of years in particular here in Jamaica with the more severe and accelerating disasters and the ecosystem dimension of that. Thirdly, of course, our strong cooperation over the years, 50 years of collaboration on disaster management, initially crisis response, Hurricane Gilbert, and many of the hurricanes even before Gilbert. But then onwards, of course, in recent times to addressing risk reduction, trying to minimize those impacts through risk reduction measures, early warning systems, so that communities can enhance the resilience of their assets, of course, saving lives, and moving to resilient recovery systems, which is, of course, front and center at the moment. And last but obviously not least, that progressive evolution of our work on governance. It was there at the beginning in terms of UNDP's support on building basic institutions, that basic institution building focus, and new entities, new public agencies to advance development goals, but then looking more broadly again to risk-informed governance, how systems of governance can then connect with these multidimensionality that I mentioned just earlier, more of a deep dive focus on determinants of multidimensional poverty, such as access to justice, and indeed, as Prof. Waller mentioned earlier, advancing the digital governance agenda. This is just a quick snap of how some of those things have changed. I won't repeat further, except to note front and center there is, of course, the emergence of the important human development policy lens in the 90s onwards, which of course is taking on more of a multidimensional lens, looking at more at inequality, at planetary pressures, at gender justice, and many other dimensions that are mentioned right here. Now, we meet on this day, perhaps more importantly, to commemorate Sir Arthur Lewis and his legacy through this annual memorial lecture. And the links between Sir Arthur Lewis and the UN development system more generally date back many years. Not everybody knows, but of course, Sir Arthur Lewis served as the Deputy Managing Director globally for the UN Special Fund in the late 50s and early 60s, which of course was UNDP's predecessor organization. So in 1965 and 66, the UN Special Fund and the UN Special Program of Technical Assistance at the time merged into the creation of UNDP globally. And of course, his vision for post-colonial empowerment, development, and justice for the most vulnerable in society shaped many countries' development paradigms, not just through that term that he served with the UN globally, but more generally. Needless to say, a big part of why he was recognized for the Nobel Prize in 1979. So looking at the model, the development model that emerged from his scholarly work and his role as a practitioner in the region and globally, it was really a key factor in the rise of global South development pathways. And so he serves in many ways as one of those founding practitioners, founding fathers and mothers that actually contributed to some of those foundational concepts and pillars of the development journey in the post-colonial era. A key venue of application is in the rise of the developmental state model in Asia and that related socioeconomic transformation that took shape. And it was really, the Lewis model was used in many ways alongside with domestic indigenous concepts, needless to say, but it played an important role in that blueprint in terms of shifting surplus labor from agriculture to industrialization, rapid structural transformations in places like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and later on in China as well. And so that has had, needless to say, a global impact in terms of the global development agenda. There are some elements to it, which many of you know, of course, but in case there's participants that find this enlightening, there are some key elements of the Lewis development model, including that dual sector approach, that connectivity in a transition, side by side, evolution of the agriculture sector, using some lower productivity contributions into higher productivity sectors. So this was critical at the time in terms of those initial years in the post-colonial pathway. The turning point concept, whereby once that reached a certain point, wages would start to rise, resulting in a turning point. And this, of course, has been also critical in managing transitions in some of those countries that I mentioned, and it continues to be important in understanding what's going on today in many countries, emerging economies, emerging South. And of course, the reinvestment of that accumulation from that industrialization to further accelerate modernization, that profit investment nexus has been really central, of course, as we've seen the last few decades, in particular in that acceleration of the emergence of these emerging economies across Asia and Africa and elsewhere. So strong relevance in terms of development policy paradigms, in terms of that academic element, but definitely in terms of practice and the development pathway in terms of results. So what does this mean for today and for the future? Well, it really continues to hold relevance for understanding some of the structural foundations of inequality and understanding modern development, the inequalities embedded that are still very much embedded in this modern development process. Inequality, one of the global crises before us, needless to say, both within countries, but also among countries. But also importantly, and as was touched on earlier by the Vice Chancellor, lessons for understanding structural legacies, geopolitical power dynamics, and his strong central emphasis throughout his career on the colonial legacies and the impacts of that social and natural resource extractivist systems during the colonial era. Suppression of local systems, innovation, local thought on future development pathways. And this, of course, left Global South with weak capacities in many ways during that initial post-colonial process, overdependence on commodities, et cetera. And so he strongly, of course, critiqued there's north-south equalities as well in global trade, investment systems, all very much current issues, needless to say. And so many of these legacies remain. The poly crisis, as it's being called today, where a key issue within that is that development gains across the South are really at risk. And some of the issues and concepts from the Lewis development model and sort of Lewis's work in general can really benefit our approach to rethinking development today in context of these shifts and finding solutions, needless to say. So what are the key development challenges going forward now that we can build on some of these issues I just mentioned? So there's just three. There's many, of course, but I'm just going to focus on three at the moment for sake of this discussion. So the ability of countries to sustain development gains, hard-won development gains over those decades, to achieve that sort of transformation and impact. And this is really being affected. Risks are growing around the development agenda around rising inequality, threatening cohesion and social compacts. And that's compacts, obviously, between countries as well as within countries. The climate emergency is really coming from above, but it's also coming from, it's really reshaping the base of development across various pillars, all pillars of the development agenda. And lastly, of course, that rapid transformation in terms of challenges and opportunities in institutions and markets and society more generally from the digital revolution. So we've published and launched a few reports in 2025 on the future of development and some of these issues. We launched, of course, our Global Human Development Report 2025 on possibilities in the age of AI, the Global Multidimensional Poverty Index Report 2025 on the nexus of poverty and climate hazards, our Development at Risk Global Report, which looks into that polycrisis from that broader lens, and of course our Regional Human Development Report on the pressures specifically in the LAC region that are taking shape. So firstly, on the nexus of climate and development. From our multidimensional lens and the index, the MPI, it looks at, of course, multiple deprivations beyond income in terms of understanding social vulnerability and poverty, for health, education, standards of living, various elements that are there on that, and that's the right side of the screen there. Now, the intensity of poverty and the incidence are very much being shaped today, of course, by climate change. And so climate change is rising as a leading source of multidimensionality, of multidimensional poverty and vulnerability, a threat to food, water, livelihoods, and across the system really is in terms of also that climate-induced disaster escalation. So the need to address poverty from a climate lens is a top priority from a poverty policy perspective, and integrating planetary pressures and instability into our work on combating social exclusion, advancing livelihoods, reducing vulnerabilities is really central. And the MPI report of 2025, for the first time, we've really put that front and center. So this is just one example where we're looking globally at numbers of poor people and deprivations across those criteria, and looking specifically at that extra dimension when you factor in climate. So most poor people globally are in places that are exposed to climate change, at least one of those hazards. And you see here the difference across those criteria of multidimensional poverty when you factor in climate impact. So a significant increase, of course, in vulnerability in terms of the number of people that are facing both of these, climate emergency and multidimensional poverty. So the report does a spatial overlay of the climate hazards, but also the people that are identified as being multidimensional poor, which again is a significant percentage of multidimensional poor globally are also facing this climate crisis. In Jamaica specifically, there's a new series of subnational climate analyses that are emerging to map out that vulnerability as a base for taking more scaled up action on adaptation. So UNDP's local climate capacity development initiatives also build on this analysis, but also there on the bottom right of the screen, it's a platform, a digital platform. We have a global platform called the UNDP Human Climate Horizons Platform, which looks into data across this, the social climate nexus, and trying to use the tool of AI and digital to really bring that into policymaking support at the country level. So, of course, SIDS are on the front line. They've contributed very little to this process historically, very negligible, and going forward in the coming decades. So there's historic responsibility and accountability for the generation, and this involves scaling up finance for taking action, but also, there's a view in the region, of course, in the Caribbean towards more resilience-based development models, reparatory measures to account for loss and damage, Hurricane Melissa really was a case in point. It was the strongest ever, of course, climate-induced disaster in Jamaica's modern history. And looking at it from a multidimensional lens, one can really get a sense of how catastrophic it is now. And these are some pictures from my site visits. This was about a week after, days after landfall in Western Jamaica. So a top priority is really to continue the global push for large emitting economies, particularly those with the largest historical responsibility for the carbon budget currently in the atmosphere, expanding loss and damage finance, climate adaptive development policy is a global challenge to really readjust development thinking to address this planetary crisis and resilient recovery solutions. Climate change is bringing disproportionate impacts on the most vulnerable communities and countries. In the UN Special Rapporteur for Extreme Poverty's report a few years ago, he called the risk of a future climate apartheid in terms of this growing gap between the rich and poor along social and economic lines, but also the important climate element, some of those vulnerabilities and dimensions of multidimensional poverty I mentioned. So this being exacerbated, these trends of these gaps are being exacerbated by climate change. Globally, over 200 million people could be climate displaced, 200 million pushed back into poverty owing to climate change in the coming decades, unless urgent action is taken. But as I mentioned, this climate inequality hybrid crisis is a call not just for scaled-up climate action, but also for rethinking development paradigms from extractive to justice-oriented, nature-based restorative pathways. And secondly, that transformational agenda on digital. As we know already by now, the fourth industrial revolution, including digital technologies, but more broadly, have brought rapid change to many countries globally, to institutions, to markets, to society, and a need, therefore, also for development policymakers to be adaptive. Beyond those old linear mechanistic models of development from the last century, today we can best understand development as the emergent property of a complex system, multidimensionality and complexity. And this entails a shift from linear to adaptive systems. This focuses on resilience, is one of the dimensions that comes through. The ability of communities not just sustain those past gains, sustain pre-existing development thinking and pathways, but really to adapt and transform those in the face of rapid change. So, does AI present a new calculus of development? They raise the revolution in many ways, as we know. Agency, a fundamental element of human development theory and policy. The AI's power to autonomously process information and make decisions calls into question, in some ways, conventional paradigms. Shifting to address this tension between human agency and AI autonomy has kicked up a lot of, obviously, academic work and real-life consequences, but also augmentation. So between routine automation, it also expands what people can do, of course, in many ways, enabling new activities through that complementarity, human AI complementarity with opportunities. And this, of course, brings up serious issues from the risk perspective, but also opportunities when it comes to that issue, as I mentioned at the onset, of the connection between labor and the social and market dimensions of development. I won't go into too much detail, but we, of course, know the surge in recent years of AI, 30 times AI investment surge, 4 times AI startups. These global figures. But despite this, it's about how it spreads and how wide it spreads, of course, between countries and within countries. So there are gaps, which is the focus, of course, in our Human Development Report, addressing those gaps that are emerging, those inequalities in how it spreads and how wide it spreads. But it is indeed a general purpose technology, much like other foundational parts of modernity, like electricity and the internet in past decades. So one question we really focus on as UNDP is, the balance between, using technology, of course, and trying to further advance convergence convergence between countries, convergence between, closing those gaps at the local level too, in terms of inequalities and opportunities, development opportunities. And so AI's development and disruptions at the moment, we're seeing them accrue unevenly, of course, between nations and countries. And so that's a major challenge and a major focus for our work. Non-linearity, technology and its focus and its implications for institutions and production, social norms, has been an engine in the past, in general, technology, but also indeed it has led to situations of divergence depending on access and how it's used. So we see here the HDI, the Human Development Index, and this adjustment through an inequality lens, and now AI and digitization and climate converging forces really bringing this downward pressure in some places, in some countries around the world. So AI's influence on human development is channeled through among others. This is one way to look at it that touches on people's capabilities, freedoms, and therefore agency, as I mentioned. So that fundamental concept of human development paradigm, development as freedom, what's the role of these changes through AI and digitization? And beyond GDP, of course, it touches on productivity and opportunity at the individual and community level. Lastly, changes in institutions. We're seeing that quite sharply in many countries, both across the global south, but even in Western contexts, changes in institutions, levels of trust, change management. And so if we look ahead to now to 2030 and beyond, a few policy choices on this trajectory of AI and development, as there were for climate and development, prioritizing human well-being and capabilities, bringing out these dividends for equality and equal opportunity, using AI as an approach to accelerate development opportunities and not exacerbate the divergence risk. Innovate systems-based approaches to governance, of course, those important ethical frameworks, regulatory oversight mechanisms, and lastly, that robust infrastructure that's needed to balance the opportunities between rural and urban, bring out those local innovations and capacities for innovation, and advance those development policies in an adaptable way to be able to prepare for the future towards 2030 and beyond in terms of this pervasive impact and influence of AI. Again, some of the references, but to learn more, of course, you can always reach out to us, but you can also find this, of course, on UNDP.org or UNDP.org/Jamaica, our multi-country office website. So thank you so much again for the opportunity, and I hope that thought-provoking and contributed to this discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kishan, for a very thought-provoking, relevant, and interesting conversation. As a matter of fact, I don't think people realize how much of Lewis's work can be reflective of the conversations that are happening now with regard to AI. Looking at the move from mass production to knowledge workers, looking at low production related work and how development can be facilitated in that regard. On 4 counts, as a matter of fact, I can identify I can identify connections between the two, to the point where I would invite anyone to write a paper looking at the current Gen AI for development models that are being articulated by various international organizations, and looking at how Lewis's framework could be a better approach to how development can be achieved using this kind of technology. I'm opening up the floor for a few questions. Please use the raise hand feature to identify yourself. When you come on, please indicate your name and your organization affiliation, and then you can ask the question. Do we have anyone? I don't see any. Kishan, it's often a sign, of how clear and thought-provoking your presentation was.
And it's Monday morning, so I don't
and it is Monday morning. It is Monday morning as well. That too as well. Any question? Well, until we have questions coming, as I said earlier when I started, we at SALISES, we do recognize the Gen AI, and we do recognize the value of Gen AI as a solution, or as one of the solutions that Louis spoke about, in terms of that type of technology that can be cost effective, easy to understand, because it's a language module, so you don't need to type. You can just speak to it. It has all the functionalities of what Norman Gervin would call an appropriate technology. Does UNDP have any plans to integrate Gen AI as a development tool in pretty much the same way they did in the early 2000s with the ICT for development initiatives that they had globally? Because I do remember, since the 2001 Human Development Report that spoke about ICT for development, it essentially launched an entire menu of projects and programs. So I don't know if you're moving in that direction now.
Absolutely.
Okay. Excellent.
Absolutely. No, great question.
All right.
Great question.
All right.
As you say, it has been a historical element that we already started. I mean, from decades, we've been trying to bring in that modernization and future-oriented approach to our cooperation. So, as you said, there was the ICT for development stage. There was basic things like climate resilient irrigation, or more efficient water systems from the 70s onwards, more efficient water systems for irrigation agriculture. That was critical, of course, for boosting productivity and incomes. Energy systems. I mean, some of the initial solar-based development systems were launched in those days in the 70s onwards, even though it took a while for them to reach this level of scale and deployment that we're seeing today globally. But there's a lot of lessons from technology deployment even during those 70s. And then onwards, ICT for development, definitely. In recent years and today, we're introducing digital as part of our capacity development support and access to justice. I mean, the judicial system, moving from paper-based judicial decisions, for example, to more efficient stenography and capturing proceedings, to the use of e-case management systems. That's an example in the realm of governance and digitization and justice. In the climate action part of it, bringing in digitization AI in terms of tracking climate hazards, and also even understanding changes in ecosystems. So through various geospatial connectivity that all has a lot of not just digitization more broadly, but even AI dimensions. So we're trying to use modern technology to address some of those long-standing challenges of inequality and environmental degradation. I think
observation, but before, Camille Gibson, could you just tell us who you are and just identify your organizational affiliation and ask a question, Camille?
Hopefully you can hear me. Camille Gibson, Prairie View A&M University in Texas. I'm a member of the board of the Jamaica Foundation of Houston. My question is related to your previous comments regarding AI and the Caribbean. What are some things that people in Jamaica should be doing at this time to prepare for what we're hearing is that fourth industrial revolution?
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, I mean, one thing I think is one of our core mandates generally as UNDP is the focus on capacity development. And so we look at that in terms of what are the capacities needed at the systemic level, the systems level. So that's your policies, regulations, strategies. And so I think that's critical to at the upstream level, let's say, in terms of looking now to the starting to look at the post-2030 agenda and looking more generally at, for example, as we advance our support for a recovery plan following Hurricane Melissa, which was quite a significant historic event, rather than just a disaster. It really has systemic impacts in terms of the forward development challenges, in terms of having an effective and resilient recovery process. So bringing into that recovery planning process, that recovery governance process, recovery governance mechanisms, bringing into that already the opportunities from digitization and AI in terms of, for example, when you're assessing impacts in a community, using digital and AI tools can really rapidly speed up that process, shifting from paper and pencil, but even shifting from just a standard database system in a computer. Really using that power of speed to actually make sure that the speed of the response for communities is matched. At the institutional level, I think there's a big focus that we have on capacity development for small and medium enterprises. It's an amazing space really for youth employment generation. If we're looking ahead to youth employment challenges, addressing those inequality gaps today, but also into the future, the need for capacities within small and medium-sized enterprises across Jamaica. It's the vast majority of the economy by enterprises, and a majority of GDP production as well is from small and medium-sized enterprises. So bringing up to speed on digital and AI in terms of the risks as well as the opportunities, that's another focus we have in our work in Jamaica and across the Caribbean and globally, actually. And then lastly, that level of individual capacity development. So through our collaboration with universities, bringing that into the academic sphere and as the base, really, of course, for individual capacity development through curriculum, through lectures, and through other initiatives that we do with not just with UWI, but with UTech, with university in the Bahamas and elsewhere in the Caribbean and countries we cover. So bringing that into it as well. So we're looking at it from that kind of systemic lens of capacity development in our cooperation. But thanks for the question, Camille.
Thanks. We have a question from Lorna Grant.
Good morning, colleagues. I am Lorna Grant, North Carolina Central University. Professor Waller, I know you are the guru on UNDP in Jamaica and at UWI. Now, my question is, how well is UWI preparing the general public on resilience when we think about AI and resilience when we think about the recent hurricane? What role is UWI playing or prepared to play to educate the general public?
Well, we have the perfect person to respond to the question, the Vice Chancellor. I can speak from observation. So the University of Western is immediately following the hurricane. The principal had established a task force. And one of the things that the university did was to set up a portal to receive funds to support students and also other Jamaicans that were trapped or affected negatively by the hurricane. So on one hand, they were responsible for creating that kind of platform or portal to receive funds to be able to support the recovery efforts, and it was extremely helpful, specifically for the emergency aspect of the aftermath of Hurricane Melissa. The difference between emergency and recovery. Emergency is dealing with the immediate activities, and is more so the planning. So on the recovery part, they have been very substantive in terms of engaging them. They've also, and again, there would be more to say, but I'm just saying based on what I do know. They've also engaged the government in terms of the Ministry of Health, in terms of providing them with support as it relates to nurses and also, medical related activities. In terms of Gen AI, I can say categorically that there's been an establishment of several Gen AI centers that are being used to provide training and capacity building to different Caribbean persons. Also, as it relates to raising awareness, a large part of the challenge of AI is making people aware of AI and how it's being used. But I'd go a little bit further with regard to the awareness, Kishan, because it comes to a point that I was going to make and then ask Arlene, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot here, Dr. Bailey, that not just only awareness, but I think as a part of the awareness conversation, we need to build confidence. And let me tell you why. For years, we've been told, this generation, the generation before, that technology can achieve development. But for years, a lot of the technology has essentially been out of our grasp. They're too complex. They're costly. You know, you have to write a program to get an app. You need to get a webmaster to write to use HTML and Java to create a website. And then overnight, since ChatGPT, now you can just talk to the computer and say, I want a website, and the website is built within 30 seconds. You know, I want you to create an app. The app is built within 30 seconds, and you can have a conversation with this AI, and it can do everything basically that, you know, successive technologies have. And, you know, I'm of the belief that we've passed Industry 4.0, we're now in 5.0, and that's a conversation for another time. But Kishan, the problem is between Hollywood and IT persons who needed something for validation, and their form of validation was to articulate these computers in a very complex ways that persons are now afraid to use them. And now you have to sit and convince people that this type of technology, ChatGPT, is not anything that is complicated. You can just install it and speak to it, and it will speak back to you and tell you what you need to get. And I think in the raising awareness aspect of development assistance that many agencies do when they're rolling out new programs and projects, I think there needs to be a component to build confidence, because part of the problem that I'm seeing in the field when it comes to rolling out GenAI or training persons to use it, especially persons over the age of 40, is that kind of subconscious fear that it is complicated and difficult to use. So I think that is something that you need to, you know, take back to HQ in that regard. Lorna, I hope I answered your question. Lorna? Lorna is okay. Professor Henry Lee, PVC Henry Lee. You have the floor, PVC Lee.
Oh, okay. I had difficulty unmuting. Just to say that I can't put on my video either, but that's okay. I think you have my image. Good morning, VC and colleagues. Good morning, everyone. Kishan, good to see you. Excellent presentation. Just to say that the University of the West Indies has embraced the use of AI in an ethical manner. So we do have an AI policy framework that was approved by the boards for undergraduate studies and graduate studies. And so we are not retreating, we are not running away from it. We are embracing its use in an ethical manner. We encourage our lecturers to state upfront how they want AI to be used in the classroom. And if you use it in a manner which was not mandated, then we would have a problem in terms of cheating, etc. But we have embraced the use of it. We are educating our lecturers. We have had capacity building workshops on the use of AI in research put on by the School for Graduate Studies and Research, and we continue to build capacity among our students and our lecturers. But we are aware that the language, the data, that is generated from these programs needs to be used carefully. And I really would encourage people like Lloyd to build a localized ChatGPT where we have our own data algorithms that tell our own story, use our own cultural examples so that we can use AI in a more localized and relevant manner. Because right now, when we put in input something, we are getting examples from overseas and not really relevant to our context. So it's a challenge to you, Prof. Waller, to build us a Caribbean equivalent of these programs. Thank you.
Thanks, Prof. Lee. So, Prof. Lee, I will leave the cultural application to be built by cultural studies. But what I can say to you is that you know, we've done SALISES. We've done the first national survey in the Caribbean, I guess in the Americas, on looking at Gen AI readiness, whether or not the citizens are ready for Gen AI. You know, looking at attitudes, knowledge, and practices, and readiness for Gen AI. And from that we've established that SALISES, we have the data bank. So we've repurposed the data bank to a kind of Gen AI dashboard where we're currently populating it with, creating a kind of repository of all the different stories, services, products locally developed, Gen AI products and services across the Caribbean, because we thought that we needed to have that kind of space where we can, because it's one of the few technologies that we can own. Former to, we used to have to be purchasing these technologies off the shelf or using quote unquote open source technologies, which are really not open source technologies. But for the very first time, there's some form of ownership for this kind of technology. So we have to be very careful in terms of documenting ownership and use, and creating a place that Caribbean people can go to support other Caribbean persons. So we've done that. And we've also developed, and we're in the process of finalizing an app that we're working with another company with through Fiverr that will help micro enterprise entrepreneurs. And Kishan, I'm going to come to you to have a conversation about this with you some more, to help micro enterprise entrepreneurs in Jamaica who struggle, who, we do training and it works, yes, but when you leave after a while, you forget everything that you're trained, and then these little pamphlets that you get, you generally never touch them. But what if you had an app that could systematically pop up and tell you when you need to have the information, or you could speak to, today I'm doing this, can I get some information on how to get it, which we should have all of the different, which would connect all the different data points of entrepreneurial connection that are currently not connected in Jamaica. But can you imagine connecting the entire Caribbean and the university doing all of that? So that's where we are in SALISES in terms of moving forward. I personally learned a lot from the ICT for Development drive. I have an entire dissertation on it, and I vowed to, if was ever been placed in this position again, to do it right, do it right this time. So we're trying to see how best we can do our part, Audrey, as a university, to try to see how best to get the Caribbean to move in this particular direction. All right. Do we have any other? All right. If we don't have any, I'm going to. Oh, Dr. Bailey. Sorry, go ahead.
Thanks very much, Prof. Waller, and thanks very much, Reverend Dr. Khoday, for an excellent presentation as well. Prof. Waller, you had asked for comments on the partnerships and use of the digital development and the technologies over the years. Mm-hmm. So UNDP over the years, congrats as well on the National UNDP Day and the 50 years of partnership. Over the years, UNDP has supported the ICT usage in communities, libraries, starting with the telecenters, the community access points. This is in Jamaica and across the Caribbean. So in Bahamas, the focal points, Turks and Caicos, and so on. And Prof. Thomas Hope, who is on, would have been involved in these initiatives as well. And one of the key areas going forward with the AI support, and as you mentioned, the types of training that will be in place, the intergenerational support, the support for the elderly, persons with disabilities. PVC Henry Lee mentioned the localization, and that's important as well. All of those will be key in continuing the initiatives to support everyone being involved as we seek to look at, post 2030 and beyond, and the roles that technology can use to support the various initiatives. Also for the diaspora, we've had colleagues from the diaspora who have been in the discussion as well, and it's a key role in maintaining the connections and the social support through the informatics. So thanks again for the presentations and the comments and discussions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bailey, for that. Dr. Bailey is also one of our researchers in SALISES who is doing great work on ICT for development. I don't think we have any other. Dr. Northover, are you on? Pat? We're going to ask
Okay.
Dr. Northover to give the vote of thanks. Pat? Sorry, let me introduce. Dr. Northover is also one of our senior research fellows in SALISES, doing great work on development, economic development, agriculture and development, and climate resilience as well. Dr. Northover?
Greetings, everyone. Thank you to everyone who came here today to listen to this riveting presentation by Kishan Khoday, celebrating 50 years of the activity of the United Nations Development Program in the region and celebrating the work of Sir Arthur Lewis. It's been a rich conversation focusing on the triple crises, the climate emergency, rising inequality, digital transformation in our institutions, and allowing us to also reflect on the intersections between the work of the United Nations through the UNDP and the work of Sir Arthur Lewis, both in terms of his own contributions to development in theory, in praxis, in policy, and in politics, and the rich range in which he advanced the development agenda, some of the contradictions that lay within our spaces in trying to understand the genius of Sir Arthur Lewis and the pragmatism with which he sought to advance the development agenda at the same time that he was aware of the inequalities in which development projects were shaped, given his interest in labor justice as well as reparatory justice. Certainly the insights that we gain from the UNDP today brings us a chilling reminder of the ways in which development has deepened inequality over time. And even as we celebrate the fourth or fifth industrial or technological revolution, we also have to realize that it also carries with it certain global governance challenges in terms of platforms, the leaders in defining the terms on which the regulation of the new technologies will be guided, and the competition between the superpowers in maintaining an advantage in those processes, and the ways in which smaller states are not really regulatory leaders, but regulatory followers. So there has to be a very strong strategic awareness on the part of those countries in order to maximize potential benefits from any new technology. One of the issues that wasn't discussed today, but not highlighted, was some of the drawbacks of the AI revolution in terms of its energy intensity, its water intensity, and also the increasing competition for raw earth materials to support the development of this technology and the contributions to environmental waste. So there are lots of pros and cons involved in the new revolution. It requires, as Dr. Khoday pointed out, strong mechanisms of governance that would bring to bear equitable, inclusive, and innovation savvy approach to development processes. I just want to thank everyone who made today's contribution, this lecture possible. First of all, to Dr. Khoday and the UNDP for their sterling work and for his personal investment in the region and his academic insights as well as thought leadership in his own work. To the Vice Chancellor for his riveting contextualizing remarks on the political dynamics of thought leadership, where we have competing concerns in the region, not necessarily ad hominem critiques of Arthur Lewis, but concerns over some of the conservative elements were a deeper dependence on international interests may undermine the longer term development goals that are seen with inviting closer relationships with countries which have had a checkered history in terms of their relationships with the global south. So obviously the tensions were real in terms of Arthur Lewis's work and his ideas, but I think that intellectual tension was also a part of the critical dimensions of thinking about the Caribbean from different perspectives. So it does also augment thought pluralism and contestability of ideas. And I think that is also a rich legacy in the region, that we do have so many different thought leaders and they are competing and looking at the problem from different angles, emphasizing different dimensions. So it was a very rich contextualization by the Vice Chancellor. And we were very efficiently guided through the proceedings by our own director here at Mona, Professor Waller, and he gave us much food for thought on the possibilities for AI in his comments and the work that SALISES has been doing, institutional leadership as well as academic leadership. And we thank him for his very strong hands on the ship and leading us in this direction towards a deeper capacity development in areas that are cutting edge. And for all our viewers online who took the time to listen into this rich conversation on development and the trajectories that we're anticipating. It's a very turbulent space, as Dr. Khoday had pointed out, uncertainties. The geopolitical environment that we're living in is full of unexpected shocks and unexpected policy announcements that make it very difficult for small states and even larger states to cope with the constant uncertainty as to what will happen next. But even in these contexts, with the sharp increases in environmental shocks that we're experiencing associated with climate change, the geopolitical shocks that we're experiencing, and the digital revolution shocks that we have to negotiate, Caribbean countries, in the spirit of Arthur Lewis, are always willing to innovate and to seek potential out of crises, to seek new possibilities and new horizons, and hopefully deepen the legacy of democratic governance that we have, that will hold our leaders to account and hold those who are in international organizations, whether it be in the United Nations or whether it be in the Security Councils, that we will have a greater say as the persons who are deeply impacted by the decisions that are made by our leaders, that they will be held accountable in all that they do. And we are looking forward to continuing the work with the UNDP in all our future collaborations. And just wanted to thank again everyone, especially those technical persons, Richard Leach, and the support that is provided through the Zoom technology. Thank our PVC for Research for taking the time to be here with us as well. And for all our colleagues near and far, and all those who were here today to listen to this presentation. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much for your questions. Thank you so much for being a part of the process of changing the environment in which we live, transforming spaces, transforming lives, each in our different ways towards a better future. So thank you all, and I wish you a very, very wonderful UNDP Day, as well as a wonderful rest of 2026.
Thank you, colleagues, and you in.
Man, thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Kishan. Really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure, privilege. Thank you so much.